Let's begin with Chapter 4, Understanding the Hazards. In this lesson, we will be discussing identifying and describing common types of hazardous materials containers, describing which ways hazardous materials are transported, identify resources for technical chemical information, and identify components of potential terrorist incidents, and explain how to respond to terrorist incidents. Common chemicals and containers can become powerful weapons. The intent of this lesson is to distinguish between accidental release and terrorism. Chemicals come in different types of containers. Examples can include non-bulk packaging, such as drums, carboys, and compressed gas cylinders. Or they can come as bulk packaging with large volume containers identified by their initial capacity based on maximum capacity of greater than 119 gallons, maximum net mass greater than 882 pounds, and a maximum capacity of greater than 119 gallons as a receptacle of a solid. Water capacity greater than 1,000 pounds as a receptacle for gas. Bulk packaging is found in occupancies that rely on and need to store large quantities of a substance. Secondary containment is an engineered method to control spilled or released product if the main containment vessel fails. A secondary containment system can typically hold the entire volume of the tank itself. Large volume storage tanks are also commonly found at fixed facilities. They are usually made of aluminum, steel, or plastic and can be pressurized or non-pressurized. Examples can include bulk fixed facility pressure containers, 1-ton containers for gases such as chlorine, Y cylinders, bulk fixed facility cryogenic containers, pressurized horizontal tanks have rounded ends or large vents or pressure relief stacks. Above ground pressurized tanks commonly can contain liquid propane or liquid ammonia, and these containers can hold up to several thousand gallons of product themselves. These tanks usually have a small vapor space or head space, as is referred to, above the liquid itself. Ton containers are commonly used to hold compressed liquefied gases such as chlorine and sulfur dioxide. These vessels hold 2,000 pounds of product and are 8 feet in length and 3 feet in diameter. All ton containers, other than those containing phosphine, have fusible plugs. Intermodal tanks, these are both for shipping and storage vessels. They can hold between 5,000 and 6,000 gallons of product and can be either pressurized or non-pressurized. The most often shipped to a facility where they are stored and used and then returned to the shipper for refueling. IM tanks can be shipped by all methods of transportation. Types of IMO tanks available: IM 101 portable tanks, or Type 1 internationally. These have 6,300 gallon capacity with internal working pressures between 25.4 psi and 100 psi. These typically can carry mild corrosives, food grade products, and flammable liquids. IM 102 portable tanks, or Type 2 internationally. These have 6,300 gallon capacity with internal working pressures between 14.7 psi and 25.4 psi. They primarily carry non-hazardous materials but may also contain flammable liquids or corrosives. Pressure intermodal tanks, or Type 5 internationally. These tanks are high-pressure vessels with internal pressures in a range of 100 to 600 psi. They commonly hold liquefied compressed gases such as propane and butane. Cryogenic intermodal tanks, or Type 7 internationally. These are low-pressure containers in transport but can be pressurized up to 600 psi. They commonly carry cryogenic materials such as liquefied oxygen, nitrogen, and helium. Tube models consist of several high-pressure tubes attached to a frame. The tubes are individually specified and have working pressures in a range as high as 5,000 psi. The products commonly carried include hydrogen and oxygen. Intermediate bulk containers are volumes stored inside them fall between what is typically found in drums or bags or what is in cargo tanks. Their capacities are greater than 119 gallons but less than 793 gallons, and they include flexible intermediate bulk containers, or super sacks, or rapid intermediate bulk containers, or totes. Super sacks have bottom-mounted discharge valves and are commonly found at fixed facilities. Totes do have bottom-mounted discharge valves as well. The flexible bladder is typically portable and is used for short-term storage and dispensing of low-hazard materials. Now let's talk about the types of vehicles transporting hazardous materials. Hazardous materials may be transported by air, sea, land, or a combination of all three modes of transport. In roadway transportation, a cargo tank is bulk packaging that is permanently attached to or forms as part of a motor vehicle or is not permanently attached in any motor vehicle that, because of its size, construction, or attachment to a motor vehicle, is loaded or unloaded without being removed from the motor vehicle. So what they mean is it's attached to a trailer, basically, or it's permanently affixed to the vehicle. Non-pressure liquid cargo tanks are MC306 DOT406 cargo tanks. The characteristics of these tanks are frequently carry liquid food-grade products, gasoline, or other flammable and or combustible liquids. They are oval-shaped, pulled by diesel or liquefied natural gas or compressed natural gas tractors. They carry between 600 to 10,000 gallons of product, and they're non-pressurized. Usually they're made of aluminum or stainless steel and offloaded through valves at the bottom of the tank. Their safety features will include rollover protection and remote emergency shutoff valves as well. Low pressure chemical cargo tanks are MC307 DOT407. The characteristics of these tanks are round or horseshoe shaped tanks able to hold 6,000 to 7,000 gallons of liquid, low pressure and tractor drawn trailers, and used to transport flammable liquids, mild corrosives, and poisons. These tanks may be insulated or uninsulated and may have higher internal working pressures than the non-pressurized liquid cargo tanks. Chemical cargo tanks, or MC312 DOT412. These types of tanks is typically commonly used to carry corrosives. It has a smaller diameter than the non-pressure liquid cargo tank and low-pressure chemical cargo tank. It is often identifiable by the presence of several heavy-duty reinforcement rings around the tank. The inside of the tank operates at approximately 15 to 25 psi and holds up to 6,000 gallons of liquid. And this type of tank has substantial rollover protection as well. High-pressure cargo tanks, or MC331. These type of tanks carry materials such as ammonia, propane, freon, and butane. The liquid volumes inside these tanks vary from 1,000 to 11,000 gallons. Physical characteristics can include rounded ends and are constructed of steel or stainless steel, and it is a single tank compartment with no dividers. It operates at approximately 300 psi and is equipped with spring-loaded relief valves to operate at 110% of designed maximum working pressure. And a significant explosion hazard arises if high-pressure cargo tank is impinged by fire. The nature of most materials carried in these tanks means a threat to explosion exists because of the inability of the relief valve to keep up with the rapidly building internal pressures. Cryogenic liquid tanks, or MC338. This low-pressure tank relies on tank insulation to maintain the low temperatures required for cryogens it carries. A box-like structure containing the tank control valves is typically attached to the rear of the tank. Special training is required to operate valves on this and any other tank, and from time to time, small puffs of white vapor will be venting from the relief valve near the valve control boxes. However, this is a normal occurrence. Compressed gas tube trailers. These carry compressed gases such as hydrogen, oxygen, helium, and methane. They are high-volume transportation vehicles made up of several individual cylinders banded together and affixed to the trailer. These large volume cylinders operate at working pressures of 3,000 to 5,000 psi. One trailer may carry several different gases in individual tubes, and a valve control box is found toward the rear of the trailer, and each individual cylinder has its own relief valve. Dry bulk cargo containers. These carry dry bulk goods such as powders, pellets, fertilizers, or grain. They are not pressurized but may use pressure to offload the product. And dry bulk cargo tanks are usually V-shaped and rounded sides that funnel the contents to the bottom-mounted valves. Cargo tank markings. Responders should have a basic understanding of the container profiles and written information found on the tank and tank specification plates. With railroad transportation, when rail incidents occur, they can create unique and significant hazards. Rail cars include passenger cars, freight cars, and tank cars. Low-pressure tank cars generally use service rail tank cars. These typically carry general industrial chemicals and consumer products. They have visible valves and piping without protective housings on top of the car. The internal vapor pressures are less than 25 psi, and they may hold volumes ranging from 4,000 to 40,000 gallons. Pressure tank cars, these transport materials such as propane, ammonia, ethylene oxide, and chlorine. They have internal working pressures ranging from 100 to 500 psi and are equipped with top-mounted fittings for loading and offloading. These fittings are protected by a sturdy and easily identifiable protective housing that sits atop the rail tank car. The high volumes carried in these cars can generate long-duration, high-pressure leaks, and these tank cars may be insulated or uninsulated. Special use rail cars, such as cryogenic liquid tank cars, illustrate that a hazard will be unique to the rail car and its contents. The responder will need to pay attention to the details and features of each type. And railway gondolas are used to carry items such as lumber, scrap, metal, and coal. Boxcars carry consumer goods, industrial supplies, and boxes and pelletized goods. Freight containers can be used to transport goods on trucks, ships, and rail cars. The train crew will have information about the cars on the train, including chemical names of all products being transported. This information is typically found in the caboose with the conductor or at the engine with the engineer. The railroad industry uses tank car test pressures as a criterion for differentiating between pressurized and non-pressurized tank cars, as seen in this illustration. The specification markings on tank cars indicates the standards to which a tank car was built. And derailments can have significant effects on communities adjacent to incidents and may pose a significant risk to life, property, and the environment. Having access to the information found stenciled on rail cars may be valuable to the responders. With reference sources such as Chemtrec, Standards for Chemical Transportation and Emergency Center, it is a clearinghouse for technical chemical information. When calling Chemtrec, have the following basic information ready: name of the chemical involved in the incident, if it's known, name of the caller and callback telephone number, if disconnected, location of the actual incident or problem, shipper or manufacturer of the chemical, if known, container type, railcar or vehicle markings or numbers, shipping container's name, recipient's material, and local conditions and the exact description of the situation. Be very clear about the name of the substance when calling and confirm all spellings. The Canadian equivalent is the Canadian Transport Emergency Center, or CANUTEC, and the Mexican equivalent is the Emergency Transportation System for the Chemical Industry, Mexico, CETIC. National Response Center, the NRC, is another resource that has established complex reporting requirements for different chemicals based on the reporting quality of that chemical. Now let's talk about potential terrorist incidents. With the threat of terrorism, no area is immune to attacks. Any incident involving terrorism will require the assistance and cooperation of countless local, state, and federal resources. Responders should think about locations of potential targets for terrorists, general and specific hazards posed by chemical, biological, and radiological agents, possibility indicators of illicit laboratories, as well as basic operational guidelines for dealing with explosive events, identify possible indicators of secondary devices. Terrorists can turn objects into powerful weapons. It's the intent that distinguishes between an accident and a terroristic event. Potential forms of terrorism can include shooting into crowds and releasing biological agents into subway systems. Potential targets can include infrastructure targets, symbolic agents, and civilian targets. When responding to terrorist incidents, responders are required to make risk-based decisions on strategy and tactics, required PPE, victim rescue and/or evacuation, decontamination, and information obtained during detection and monitoring activities. Incidents with criminal intent causing widespread destruction may require the involvement of local and state and federal law enforcement agencies, emergency management agencies, allied health agencies, and the military. It is also highly important to preserve potential evidence, and after an action care review may be required for high-impact incidents. Emergency responders will usually not know at first that a terror incident has been occurred. If appropriate, precautions are not taken, the initial responders may find themselves in the middle of a dangerous situation before they realize it. The possibility of a terrorist incident should be considered when responding to any location that has been identified as a potential terroristic target. Initial actions Responders should approach a known or potential terrorist incident just as they would a hazardous materials incident. Approach from uphill in an upwind position, don PPE including SCBA, and later responding units should be staged away from an appropriate distance away. The first units to arrive should establish an outer perimeter, deny access to all persons except emergency responders, and prevent potentially contaminated individuals from leaving before decontamination takes place. Incident command should be established in a safe location outside of the area of possible contamination and beyond the distance where a secondary device could be planted. The initial task should be to determine the nature of the situation, types of hazards that could be encountered, and the magnitude of the problems that may be faced. The initial reconnaissance team should be sent out to examine the involved area and determine how many people are involved. The process of elimination may be required to determine the nature of the situation. Indicators of a chemical release could include witness reports or strong odors, mists, or sprays, many casualties and no outward signs of trauma, a visible vapor cloud, and the presence of dead or dying animals, insects, and/or plant life. When responding to the scene of an explosion, responders should have to consider the possibility of a terrorist bombing incident and remain vigilant for secondary explosive devices. Explosive ordnance disposal personnel should examine suspicious articles and disable them. When dealing with interagency cooperation, consult with local law enforcement if a terrorist incident is suspected. Unified command should also be established, and if there is a mass casualty incident, notify area hospitals and activate the mass casualty incident medical plan. Notify state and emergency management officials as soon as possible, and regional and state level responders operation centers may be established. FEMA may activate an urban search and rescue task force, and disaster medical assistance teams may be needed. The CDC Strategical National Stockpile may be requested if large caches of pharmaceuticals are needed, and the EOC can help coordinate all involved agencies. It is usually set up in predetermined remote locations and staffed by experienced command and staff personnel. When responding to chemical agent calls, indicators of possible chemical or terroristic activity involving chemical agents may vary. Overt indicators could include chemical-type gloves, chemical suits, respirators, marked or unmarked containers, chemicals with unexplained odors out of the character for the surroundings, residual chemicals, chemistry books or reference materials, and materials used to manufacture chemical weapons. Persons working around the illicit materials may become exposed as well. Symptoms of exposure would be irritation to the eyes, nose, and throat, difficulty breathing, tightness in the chest, nausea and vomiting, dizziness, headache, blurred vision, blisters or rashes, disorientation, and convulsions. Chemicals may be disseminated through explosive devices or mechanical dispersal. The extent of dissemination depends on wind direction, wind speed, air temperature, and humidity. When responding to nerve agent calls, these are toxic chemicals that attack the central nervous system. Exposure can result in injury or death within minutes. Most nerve agents are liquids in the normal states. They must be dispersed in aerosol form or broken into finer droplets for inhalation or absorption. The effectiveness of the dispersal agents depends on how long it stays in the air and how widely it is dispersed. Symptoms of exposure appear within minutes and include pinpoint pupils, runny nose, drooling, difficulty breathing, tearing, twitching, diarrhea, convulsions or seizures, and loss of consciousness. Use the mnemonic SLUDGEM to remember the symptoms of nerve agent exposure: salivation, lacrimation, urination, defecation, gastric upset, emesis, and meiosis. The most common field-level medical treatment is the Duodot autoinjector. It contains atropine and 2-PAM. Note that all nerve agents age once they are absorbed, and so the administration of Duodot may be ineffective after a period of time. When responding to biological agents calls, indicators of incidents that may potentially involve biological agents can include chemicals, production equipment, reference materials, metal cylinder cans or red plastic boxes or bags, PPE, excessive amount of antibiotics, abandoned spray devices, and unscheduled or unusual sprays disseminated. Persons working in the lab may exhibit symptoms consistent with biological weapons. They may be a delayed onset of symptoms days or weeks after the exposure even. And biological agents are organisms that cause disease and break down the body. The effects depend on the specific organism, dose, and route of entry. Some diseases caused by biological agents are contagious. Because of their incubation period, people will not begin to show signs of infection until 2 to 17 days after exposure. When responding to an anthrax call, this is an infectious disease caused by Bacillus anthracis. It is typically found around farm animals. The bacteria must be cultured to develop spores. Types of anthrax include cancerous anthrax, gastrointestinal anthrax, and inhalation anthrax. The incubation period is 2 to 6 days, and it can be treated with antibiotics if diagnosed early enough. With testing, and presumptive field tests are also available. However, the gold standard is lab testing. When responding to plague calls, this disease is caused by Yersinia pestis or bacterium found in rodents, and it is most often transmitted through flea bites. The two main forms include bubonic and pneumonic. These bacteria can survive for weeks in water in moist environments and can be cultured from distribution as a weapon or aerosol form. The incubation period is 2 to 6 days, and the disease can be treated with antibiotics. When responding to smallpox calls, this is a highly infectious and often fatal disease. It is caused by the variola virus. It first presents with small red dots or as a rash on the mouth, and lesions appear to be in the same stage of development at the same time. Lesions can be found on the palms and soles. Smallpox could potentially be dispersed in aerosol form, infecting a small number of groups as will lead to a rapid spread. Patients are highly infectious and should be quarantined immediately. When responding to radiological agent calls, signs of legitimate sources are packages well marked, tracked, and regulated. 3 varieties of labels are found on radioactive pages: white 1, yellow 2, and yellow 3. Shippers include a transport index number on the label. Industries that routinely use radioactive materials can include food testing labs, hospitals, medical research centers, biotechnology facilities, construction sites, and medical laboratories. The key is to be able to suspect, recognize, and understand when you and where you may encounter radioactive sources. Consult with the radiation safety officer at the facility. Lastly, remember that radioactive isotopes are not detected by any of the senses. When observing radiological packaging, the most common types of containers and packages used to store radioactive materials are divided into 5 major categories. Expected range radioactive packaging. This is used to transport materials that meet only general design requirements for any hazardous material package. Expected packaging is authorized for limited quantities of radioactive material that would pose a very low hazard if released in an accident. Industrial radioactive packaging. This is used in certain shipments of low activity material and contaminated objects, which are usually categorized as radioactive waste. Most low-level radioactive waste is shipped in these packages. Type A packaging. This is designed to protect the internal radiological contents during normal transportation and in the event of a minor accident. Type A packaging is characterized by having an internal containment vessel made of glass, plastic, metal, or an external packaging materials include polyethylene, rubber, or vermiculite. The consequences of a release of the material in one of these packages would not be significant because of the quantity of material in the package is limited. Type B packaging. This type of packaging is designed to prevent the release in the case of an extreme accidents occurring during transportation. These packages' designs must withstand all Type A tests and a series of tests that simulate severe or worst case accident conditions. Type B packages are often used for air transportation. Type C packaging. This type of packaging is used for transportation high radioactive substances by air. Dangerous radioactive sources are shipped in this type of packaging, and it is not certified for use in the United States. When responding to illicit laboratories calls, many materials used to manufacture homemade explosives are used to make illicit drugs. Common sites of illicit laboratories can include basements with unusual or multiple vents, buildings with heavy security, buildings with obscured windows, and buildings with odd and unusual odors. Personnel may exhibit unusual behavior such as nervousness and anxiety and may be protective of the laboratory area. Equipment present in illicit laboratories could include surveillance materials, non-weapons supplies, weapons-related supplies, and security weapons. Drug laboratories are the most common type of illicit laboratory. They are typically very primitive and may be found in small settings. They often use modified materials such as large quantities of cold tablets, hydrochloric or sulfuric acids, paint thinner, drain cleaners, iodine crystals, table salt, aluminum foil, and lithium batteries. These should be considered significant hazardous materials scenes. When responding to explosive calls, indicators of possible criminal or terroristic activity include explosives, typically include materials that fit into four major categories: protective equipment, production and containment materials, explosive materials, and support materials. If you encountered an active bomb-making operation, you should note what you see, get yourself out of the danger zone, secure an appropriate amount of the real estate, and call your local EOD team. The dirty bomb is defined as a bomb or radiation dispersal device, could contaminate a wide area. Only a select number of radioactive sources can be effectively used as an RDD. Other types of radioactive devices that may be used as weapons can include improvised nuclear device. This is a weapon fabricated from fissile material capable of producing a nuclear explosion. And radiation exposure device. This is a radioactive material in a sealed container located where persons nearby would receive a direct exposure. Concern should always be made for secondary devices. A secondary device is some form of explosion or incendiary device designed to harm responders summoned to the scene for some other reason. The attack usually takes place as responders begin treating victims. Indicators of secondary devices include trip devices and/or concealment containers. Responders can use the EVADE acronym to help think critically about presence of secondary devices. Evaluate the scene for likely areas where secondary devices could be placed. Visually scan operating areas for a secondary device before providing patient care. Avoid touching or moving anything that can conceal an explosive device. Designate and enforce scene control zones. And evacuate victims, other responders, and non-essential personnel as quickly and as safely as possible. So in summary, lots of information can be gained about an incident by knowing some basic things about containers. Although transportation of hazardous materials occurs most often on the roadway when other primary mode of transportation is used, roadway vehicles often transport the shipments from the rail station, airport, or dock to the point where it will be used. Responders must therefore become familiar with all types of chemical transportation vehicles they may encounter during a transportation emergency. The responsible person in each situation should maintain the information about hazardous cargo and provide it in an emergency. When encountering a chemical release or any mode of transportation, take time to find the responsible person and track down these valuable pieces of information. The threat of terrorism has changed the way public safety agencies operate. In small towns and major metropolitan areas, the possibility exists that on any day, any agency could find itself in the eye of the storm involving intentionally released chemical substance, biological agents, or an attack on buildings or people using explosives. The roles of the public safety responder in handling terroristic events involve many of the same functions as responders performing day-to-day basic operations, including risk-based decisions on tactics and strategy, personnel PPE, victim rescue and or evacuation, decontamination, and information obtained during detection and monitoring activities. The difference is the landscape upon which that incident is handled, and the interagency cooperation must occur. And that is the end of Chapter 4.